want to thank the folks here at Seton Hall for this invitation to speak here. This university has a special place in my heart. About 60 years ago, Seton Hall took a chance on I would term him an at-risk youth, my father, and gave him a track scholarship. Otherwise, he would not have been able to afford to go to college, and really opened doors that everything that I've done is really a consequence of what the opportunity that he was given all those years ago. And Seton Hall Law School was actually the law school that approached me in the early 1990s about teaching. I taught at Seton Hall Law School for about 5 years in the 90s, taught appellate advocacy, and discovered that I really liked it. And it's turned into, as my career has run its course, it's turned into an academic career, and that wouldn't have happened but for the opportunity given me by Seton Hall Law School. So it's very special for me to be here, and I really thank you for the invitation. The other reason I was really happy to accept the invitation to speak here today is it really gave me an opportunity to think about 9/11 in a different way, in a way that I hadn't thought about it since the immediate aftermath of the day itself, and that is in the context of the notion of the clash of civilizations, which gained currency, as many of you remember, in the aftermath of 9/11, and certainly the opportunity for demagoguery of that concept was very prominent for quite some time. So it was something that, as I'll get into in a little more detail, really a lot of our efforts in the aftermath of 9/11, and at the time I was the State Attorney General, so the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state. So at the time, much of what we were doing really was to prevent a clash of civilizations from resulting from the attacks of 9/11. And to the answer to the question whether Professor Huntington is right or wrong, I think it's neither. I think he identified something that is a potential, but that any responsible person in law enforcement or in governments throughout the world has to fight against this tendency to view things in those terms. So I've spent a lot of the last decade involved with 9/11. I was, as I mentioned, the Attorney General of the state on the day itself. Every state is configured differently in terms of its law enforcement structure. In most states, the Attorney General doesn't occupy the position that he or she does in New Jersey. Really, in New Jersey, the Attorney General has plenary law enforcement authority, and you are, at least in name, in charge of law enforcement at all levels of the state. So you are in charge of ensuring that the local police are trained adequately. You're in charge of making sure that there's uniform enforcement policies throughout the state. You're in charge of, I use the term loosely, the state police. You are, by virtue of the state police's role as the lead agency in emergency management, you are in the middle of emergency management issues. And of course, nothing really in law school or in my prior career prepared me to manage an agency the size of Law and Public Safety, which has 10,000 employees and $1 billion budget, and even more emphatically, nothing in my background prepared me for the kind of crisis management that I ended up performing while in office. Starting with Hurricane Floyd, which was my real sort of baptism by fire, and crisis management, and extending right through 9/11 and then to the anthrax attacks, which occurred in the weeks after 9/11. So that was a job where I was constantly stretched and forced to confront issues that none of my training had really prepared me for. And most of my time leading up to 9/11 was spent on an issue that has really never lost its currency, and that is the issue of racial profiling. The racial profiling scandal that enveloped the state police really broke as I was taking office. The shooting on the Turnpike, which was a national, international story of the 5 African American youths who were headed to a basketball camp down in the Carolinas, had happened a couple of years before I took office, but the extent of the department's knowledge of what was going on, the extent of the state police's knowledge, the alienation of large segments of New Jersey communities was well advanced. And the morning of the day I was to take office, there was another shooting on Route 80 of a minority driver. And so the issue sort of ripened right in front of me. And I spent most of my tenure as Attorney General dealing with that issue, with the Justice Department, the state police, with local police, enacting reforms that would basically make law enforcement more transparent and enable a level of trust between law enforcement and the communities it serves to develop. And the absence of trust was really what we were dealing with then, and I would submit is still being dealt with at some levels, although not as acutely today. So you can imagine, as if you're in charge of public safety in the state, and as I was on 9/10 and for 4 months after the attacks on 9/11, you feel a deep sense of responsibility when something like 9/11 happens. And that day really didn't give a whole lot of time for reflection because things happened so fast. But to give you a sense of what the day was like for law enforcement and the succeeding weeks and what our efforts were in terms of preventing sort of the clash of civilizations mentality from taking over, we had prepared for a potential terrorist attack for the millennium. You remember Y2K, and in the months leading up to that event, that was the first time that I recall hearing much about Osama bin Laden. He was one of a number of potential terrorists that we were concerned about leading up to the millennium anniversary. So we made plans and we coordinated with New York City that in the event that New York was attacked, our role was to be, we were going to stage on the opposite side of the Hudson River in Jersey City, in Liberty State Park. We were going to run a trauma center. We were going to obviously assist them with whatever kind of law enforcement assistance that they needed and asked for. And it was those plans that we put into effect on 9/11 when the attacks occurred. So we staged across the river from ground zero, and the state police, our principal means of communication, state police radio antenna was actually on top of the Trade Center. So when that came down, our communications were compromised. And reports were coming in all that day from all parts of the state that really, taken together, signaled a breakdown of civic order. We had reports of vigilante activity against Muslims. We had reports of Muslim sympathizers wearing explosive backpacks and walking around in Jersey City and in Patterson and in Times Square in New York. All of these turned out to be not true. There were reports that came over the radio that Muslims were dancing on the rooftops in Jersey City and in Patterson. Not true. And so one of the first lessons of that day was you have to cross-examine the source of your information and find out how reliable it is, because rumors were flying. So given this sort of flurry of rumors that were occurring, I asked for meetings with the Muslim community in Jersey City and in Patterson in the days after 9/11. And interestingly enough, and this sheds some light on the state law enforcement at the time, the federal authorities really couldn't help put those meetings together for me. It was actually an Egyptian policeman in Jersey City who arranged the meeting in Jersey City with community leaders in that city. And the point of those meetings, and eventually that grew into meeting basically at every mosque, I think, in New Jersey over the succeeding months. And the point of that was basically to assure the community that we were not going to tolerate vigilante activity of any kind, and also, frankly, to ask for help, because we knew nothing. And there's nothing more terrifying to law enforcement than having something like 9/11 happen and not know a damn thing. And that's the situation in which we found ourselves. And I think a lot of the atmospherics after 9/11 was a result of that fear. So the progress of those meetings was I think, was tremendous. And it spoke to a lack of communication prior to 9/11, but it also established a commitment after 9/11 to engage the community in a way that we hadn't before. And it was that effort that I think, and I was talking to the trooper before about the NYPD surveillance that has been going on in New Jersey, and I have no inside information on this at all. I know only my experience working with New York and what I've read in the paper, and judging from the reaction of New Jersey officials, I think part of the reason they were so upset was that they weren't probably notified adequately of what was going on. But another reason is that that's the kind of thing that will undermine trust that has been trying to be built up between law enforcement and the communities that law enforcement serves really since 9/11 itself. If you're asking communities to trust you and to provide you with information and to alert you if something unusual is happening, that kind of effort is undermined when then they find out that they're being spied on. And that law enforcement in New Jersey probably didn't even know about it. There is no reason to fault New York for wanting to be made aware of what's going on in New Jersey. From the perspective of the NYPD, they've been hit twice. In 1993, the bomb was manufactured in New Jersey. The attack was staged from New Jersey. And in 2001, one of the hijacker teams was staying in Patterson. So you can understand why the NYPD, having been hit twice, would be very curious about what's going on in the Garden State. As curious as